In my experience, pride postures over shame. Shame is a collapse, and pride is like a posture. And they're opposites, complementary opposites. So if I'm feeling shame, the last thing I want you to do, Mike, is see me in my shame. So I'm going to posture over it, and I'm going to tell you I'm fine. But deep down inside, I feel shame.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, your partner, and your world. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is simple: to help you navigate life with more clarity, more confidence, and purpose-driven action, with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I am your host, Mike Campbell, and today I'm excited to bring you my guest, the man himself, Jayson Gaddis. So this conversation was wonderful, and I was very much looking forward to this. Jayson is someone who I've followed online for quite some time, and respected his work, admired it, learned from it, and so much. So what is his work and who the hell is Jayson? Let me give you the brief overview, speak to his bio a little, and then explain a little bit about this conversation. So Jayson is an author. He's a relationship expert and coach who teaches people the one class they didn't get in school: how to do relationships. Jayson leads one of the most in-depth and comprehensive relationship trainings and trains coaches from all over the world on how to be relationship coaches. He's got thousands of fans across all multiple sorts of channels, and he's the host of the Relationship School podcast with over 4 million downloads and a few hundred episodes, and he is the visionary behind the Relationship School. Now, what he does is all sorts of things. He kind of refers to himself as a personal trainer for relationships, but more importantly at the moment, and part of what we talk about, is his new book, Getting to Zero, which is out, it's out now. Fall, if you're in North America. Spring here this week in October, depending on when you listen to this. It's out. Let's just say it's out. And in this book, he reveals the origins of conflict style. So when he's talking about getting to zero, this is what we dive into in part and explore in this podcast episode, and certainly he does it in the book. The idea of conflict being a scale of 0 to 10. When you're at 0, there's no conflict. It's connected, it's loving, it's all the things that he'll discuss. And so that's what the idea of the book is about, getting to zero. And so he reveals the origins of conflict styles and how to stop avoiding and actually resolve conflict in relationships with our loved ones and in our high stakes relationships. So it might not be quote unquote loved ones, it could be in our job, career, business, etc. And he says conflict in our closest relationships is scary because so much is at stake. If the conflict doesn't go well, we could lose our relationship, our family, our job, all connected to our security and our survival. So we do just about anything not to lose those relationships, including avoiding conflict. You might resonate with that one. Sweeping it under the rug, brushing it off, right? Just saying anything to appease so the conflict can end. So we betray ourselves and our values, or perhaps we become dishonest. And as Jayson says, unresolved conflict affects every single aspect of our lives, from self-confidence to physical and mental health. And that is something that we dive into in this conversation. It was really cool having Jayson on to talk about his work and his story. So we discussed that, not just the book and the work in the book, but like how he's ended up here, how he got into this world of relationship coaching and dealing with conflict, to the point of writing a book about getting to zero. It's not about zero conflict in your life. That's unavoidable. It's about when conflict comes up, where are we at now? How do we get to a 0 out of 10 in this moment? And so the gist of that story being, he noticed a lot of relationships keep going the same way, and at one point he had to sit with the fact that I must be the common element here. And that's what he was doing, avoiding conflict, but creating it all at the same time, and so on. So we explore his story, which is pretty fascinating, and one that got him into the world of
psychotherapy and therapy, but more specifically into relationships. And then we'll dive into conflict. What is it? How does it come about? How do we navigate this? And look at his idea of getting to zero and how we can really understand and navigate it. And then we talk about this idea of the relational leader, which I think is really, really cool. And it's not something that might be a tag or a role that one person has all the time. Although that might happen and that might potentially work, or it might also be a point of conflict at times. But in a moment, one person might need to take on that role of the leader, the relational leader, in order to navigate that conflict. So this fascinating stuff that we talk about in here, absolutely love it, and so much to explore. We explore a little bit around codependence and so on. Jayson's got so much to offer, and I can't wait personally to get my hands on the real copy of the book. I've got the early, little sneaky early version of the PDF, and it was looking really great. I didn't get to read all of it, but we've covered a fair whack of it to get the gist so we could have a real conversation about it. But I know I'm very fortunate to have a physical copy in the mail right now. So where you find this podcast, we will have links to get your copy of the book. Figure out how to get it, the best way to get it to you, whatever that is, audio, digital, physical, whatever kind of book person you are. Follow Jayson. You'll see all the links to follow him, where this episode is. We'll have all that stuff up there. Make sure you get this book in your hands if you want to learn how to navigate conflict like a boss. And of course, when I say that, I mean both you in the various relationships in your life and in your romantic relationship, you guys together can navigate it like a boss. Otherwise, if it's relationships or other, gentlemen, if you're listening to this and you're like, you know what, now is the time for me to do some work, for me to tap into what is holding me back, what's making me feel stuck and frustrated, and knowing that there's something out there more for me. There's more in me, but I don't know how to get it. And you've been living this same frustrating results for a while, and you know that something else can happen, but you don't know what it is, then maybe now's the time to do something about it. So I've got an exciting announcement coming up very, very soon. ELA, the Everyday Legends Academy, has a brand new level and intake happening. The Development Academy is a whole new version of ELA that makes it so much more accessible to everyday men, so we can build legendary lives and get more from the everyday. If you want to learn more about that, then hit me up. Come to the website, but also hit me up. Get my email, mike@mikecampbell.com.au, and say, Mike, I'm interested to learn about the Development Academy. Tell me more, and let's do that. The easiest way to make that happen is to have a conversation. So let's start that conversation and make sure that you can get to the bottom of whatever it is that holds you back and bring immense clarity to what it is you want, who you want to be, and how to go about creating that for you in your world, in your life. All right? With that, all of that said, let's get onto the show. Jayson, Gaddis, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks, Mike. I'm psyched to be here, man.
I've been an avid follower of and consumer of your content and admire it from afar for quite some time. I love what you're doing. I know you've got a book out coming out at the moment, depending exactly on when this is going live and all that kind of stuff, and we'll talk about that. But I suspect that some of my listeners and followers might also, know you and follow you. But I would love for us to dive into knowing a little bit more about Jayson Gaddis. And so the question I like to ask, and there's a big rope on this one, you can take it where you want. But in your words, who is Jayson Gaddis?
Yeah, I'm a husband. I'm a dad. I'm a work in progress. I am a relationship student and teacher. I'm always learning about relationships. It's one of my highest values. So I nerd out on talking about love, intimacy, and connection. And I got here because I sucked at relationships and I was that closed off guy. So
right.
Here I am. Yeah.
I love it. So there was clearly a point somewhere in there at which that changed from being the guy who sucked at relationships and closed off to geeking out on love and intimacy and so on. Can you talk us through that? And I'm interested to know, I suspect that prior to that, whatever that change was, it wasn't as though you didn't want
love and intimacy, but there was some kind of block or something around it. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah. So growing up, I was sensitive and emotional, an empathic boy, but I sort of got the message that wasn't welcome. So I did my best to hide that part of myself and stuffed it behind a big wall, and didn't realize that would fuck up my relationships later on, obviously. But, I was doing what I could to belong and be accepted and act tough on the outside, and eventually became an extreme athlete, and, was just thought I had a pretty cool life, but I was actually felt very alone inside. I had lots of friends. Was moving from one girlfriend to the next. Most people on the outside thought I had a pretty rad life and would often comment like, dude, your life is fucking awesome, which made me feel even more alone. Because even though I had a lot of male friends and I had girls and girlfriends that were into me, I felt like no one knew me, and I felt, just isolated in there. And so I had kind of this low-grade depression. I call it LGD, where it's not clinical, right? But it's just, I feel bad and something feels off in my life.
Like melancholy almost.
Right. Kind of melancholy and like sad deep down in there. And I think the women I dated were kind of into that about me. They were like, I know something's going on behind this guy's wall and I want to find out what it is. But anytime they tried, I would push them away. Anything that felt remotely like conflict, I would just push them away.
And roughly how old were you, through this period where you're saying on the outside, it looked like everything was great. People would even comment that, but one, you were feeling lonely, and two, those comments kind of exacerbated it.
Yeah, that was mostly in my 20s. I felt, I had awkward middle school years. I didn't have a lot of friends. I got bullied. And then high school, I found a friend group, but I was still pretty much hiding. And then in college, I did some more hiding behind my mask. But I figured out socially by the time I was 20, like socially how to fit in and get friends and get girls. And so I kind of figured out that exterior stuff, but it didn't really have me feel fulfilled.
Yeah, right. So then what was kind of the change, or was there a catalyst for you that like kicked things off to look at that?
Yeah, absolutely. My just relationship pain, really. It was my 7th kind of failed relationship at age 29, and I'm breaking up with another good woman in a Whole Foods parking lot. And here I am again, repeating myself about, how the relationship's not really going to work. And I was just kind of excuse after excuse, not really taking responsibility for anything. And I was like, I think I'm the problem here. And I actually meant it this time. I'd said that before as a cop-out, but I really meant it. And I was like,
you voiced that in the conversation?
In the car, yeah. I was like, I think I have a problem here. And, she was like, yeah, no shit, dude. But I was like, I really do. I think there's some intimacy thing, something with women or something with closeness. And I couldn't put my finger on it. She's like, well, I think you should go to counseling. And I didn't even really know what counseling was, but I was working for a wilderness therapy company at the time, working with troubled adolescent boys. And I'd hit my ceiling on the skill set I had anyway. And I was considering graduate school already to study like how to get better at working with troubled boys, basically.
Right.
I didn't even know what kind of grad school I should go to. But the combination between that and then this failed relationship, I was like, fuck, if I'm the problem here and if that's truly what's going on, then I can do something about that. And it was really the first time in my life that I took responsibility for change, and then I started to apply myself.
Nice. And so would it be right to guess that, as you said, you sitting there in the car park, that 7th relationship, saying something that sounded familiar, that maybe a majority of, or a chunk of those relationships had ended in the same mechanism? You were the one going, this isn't going to work, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I was always the one ending the relationship and moving on, kind of breaking her heart, so to speak.
Yeah.
But partly because it stopped feeling good. It started feeling hard, like work.
Right.
And I didn't want that. I really had purchased the fantasy that if you meet the right person and you find the one, you won't have any issues. And I really believed that at the time.
Yeah. And so it's fascinating to me as well that you were doing this work, with troubled young boys. And I suspect somewhere along the lines of what came next, you might have been confronted with, the troubled young boy that was inside of you.
Right. Exactly. I didn't actually know. I seriously had zero awareness that I was vicariously, getting healing by trying to help these kids with their fucked up lives, right? I really didn't have a clue. Had you even told me that at the time, I would not have made that connection. But later in retrospect, of course, I was trying to heal myself, and I just didn't know it at the time.
Wonderful. So what came next for you then?
Graduate school. A few months later, I entered into graduate school. I moved to Colorado knowing nobody, and started to study psychology, started to study myself vigorously. And
so kind of the two at the same time, like getting the education, but also like really diving into yourself.
Yeah, 30 hours of therapy was required as a student of this graduate program of therapy. Like I have to go to therapy for 30 hours. And I was like, fuck yeah. I was like, sweet. I didn't even know really what therapy was. I'd never been to therapy, but I was like, hey, dude, if this is going to help me, let's do it. Yeah.
Right. So that sounds like quite a shift though, from, as you said, the dude who through your teens and 20s was quite closed off.
Oh yeah.
And
super closed off, unavailable emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as you said, the sounds like the trigger was this emotional and relationship pain. Like this is something I don't want anymore.
That's right. Yeah. Pain for me is a great motivator. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty dense and stubborn, and the pain has to get very high for me to like pay attention and do something about
it. Fascinating. So then can I guess, in at that point through your own education, in terms of what you're studying and learning about yourself, you came to some realization that, relationships can't all be the fairy tale and the fantasy that I've purchased, as you said. I love that. And so it looks different to that. What was that kind of realization? Like, because, you use the word conflict, and I know that's a big center of a lot of the work you do. So what did that kind of look like? Like coming to terms with the fact that relationships, in a simple sense, can be hard.
Yeah. I mean, I went to grad school, met a woman younger than me, and kind of played out my relationship pattern where I was kind of the superior one. I felt superior to her. I kept my heart closed. That was very short-lived because it was so tiring. I was like back in my pattern. I was like, this is fucked up. I don't want to do this anymore. Eventually met my wife in the hallway. She was 2 years ahead of me in this same graduate degree program. And then she asked me out like a year later. She wasn't even on my radar because I was used to dating girls and she was a woman. And I was like, oh shit, there's this uncomfortable person here. I don't know what to do with this woman who can actually like meet me and call bullshit on me. I was like, ugh. But I was strangely really drawn in, right? Because I really did, deep down inside, I did want to be known and seen, and I didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to keep running my bullshit relationship patterns. I was like, no, I want to take some risks here. And so her and I dated and started dating, and pretty quickly we were in conflict. I mean, we did not really have a honeymoon stage.
Right.
It was like fighting from the start, and there was something that was actually kind of refreshing about that, and real and raw. And I just started to see that like, wow, there's so much potential here when you argue and you can't understand each other, but you stay in it. That was really new for me, staying in it.
Yeah. And I'm guessing from that your, partner at the time, now wife, was integral in, I suppose, like inviting you and drawing you in to stay as opposed to running. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, our second date, I got really emotional at this concert. We went to an outdoor concert, and I'm pretty emotional opening up to her and disclosing. And I was like, fuck, this is weird, man. I'm like just sharing my heart with this woman, but I felt so safe. And she was just like a mountain, just so present and just with me. And the next day though, of course, I would just retreat back into my shell. Like it was a one night stand or something. And I pretended like it kind of didn't happen. And she was like, where'd you go, dude? What's up? And I wanted to run and do my pattern, and I chose to stay. I was like, no, I'm going to stay. And she was integral to challenging me here, but challenging me in a way that I could hear, I'm not making me wrong, but being like, dude, what the fuck? We just had this amazing time yesterday. Now you're like running away. Like, and I was like, you're kind of calling me out, and it feels bad and feels good at the same time. Okay, sure. So yeah, I turned toward her, I stayed, and it was really pivotal for me to stay in the conversation when it gets hard.
Yeah, I love that. And I can certainly resonate with that in my own experience. And I love the question, which, it could have been something slightly different, but like along the lines of, dude, where did you go?
Yeah.
Because it's disengaging, but it's inviting. It's not threatening. It's like curiosity. It really is curiosity. It doesn't sound kind of accusatory at all. Of course, maybe 10 years earlier, you might have run from that, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think I would have run far away. I just wasn't ready. There's that saying, that when we're ready, we can actually start to make real change. I think I just wasn't ready.
And so there's a couple of things I want to dive into off what you've said. The first one is this. I'm interested for the listeners. You said, I dated girls. She was a woman.
Yeah.
Now, there's an obvious way of interpreting that, but can you kind of lead us into because obviously there's the other side of that, boys and men, right? So can you kind of lead us into how you look at that, make sense of that for us?
Yeah, sure. And I don't mean to be pejorative towards women here. That's just how I saw it at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, my pattern in relationships prior to meeting my wife was to find some younger woman who was more insecure, who I could kind of help, where I could feel like I had the upper hand and that wouldn't challenge me. So I could be the hero, right? She feels insecure. This big, cool hero guy comes in and makes her feel better about herself. That was kind of my pattern. And that way I could stay blocked and guarded and not have her come into my heart and challenge me and meet me. So it was a weird dynamic where maybe deep down inside I wanted to be met, but clearly not given my actions. I would have been choosing different partners. And so it felt like just a younger woman. And at the time, the language I used was girls, not women, in my 20s. And then, my wife was just a woman. Like she had herself,
Yeah. And what I'm getting in that is, there's a maturity, right? And when you were quote unquote finding girls, you were a boy.
Yeah, that's right.
And exactly. That was the invitation.
That's really well said.
On some level into being a man. And because I recognize that myself, in my own story, my wife, that was the case. Like, this is, I didn't think it at the time, of course, in beautiful hindsight, here is this woman. This is different. This is challenging, but there's something here for me. There's something pulling me into this. Right. And, I do hear men that I work with kind of use that language. Maybe if they're single or whatever, they might use that. I can hear from other language that they want a woman, for lack of a different term. They want someone who's mature, who can draw them in, who, but they use the language like girls. And it often there's a reflection, I think, of maybe where they are, right? And they're still looking for that. It might not be your exact dynamic, right? But that's the next thing I want to go to. I know that you talk about it and you talk about it in your book as well, in terms of like being a relational leader.
Yeah.
And so what I'd love for you to do is talk to us about that, but also like differentiate between what you mean now and what it could sound like in your old dynamic of, kind of leading the relationship, right?
Yeah,
but that sounded like it was more of a hierarchy. So can you dive into that for us?
Yeah, exactly. I think you said it pretty well there, where the hierarchy back then was boy-girl, but I still felt like I had the upper hand and was looking down upon them. In an adult mutual partnership, it's eye to eye, right? The relational leader piece for me is someone who is willing to learn and who takes responsibility for their part in a conflict or a relational dynamic. And I was not doing that. I was blaming every woman I dated.
Right.
She's not enough. She's not this enough, that enough. She's too much this way. She's not enough, just nonstop. And I wasn't saying, and some of us do that with ourselves. We blame ourselves. We're not enough. I wasn't doing that. My blame was external. But a relational leader is not blaming anyone. We're saying, or when we blame, we say, I'm blaming. Let me see if I can get under that and look at the source of this blame. Maybe it's fear. Maybe I'm feeling threatened in some way, and this is the way I'm protecting myself. So that's a very different kind of tone, right, than what I was doing.
And so therefore, in that sense, can two partners both be leading in the relationship?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't have it that men need to lead women or vice versa. It's that the most resourced person in any given moment has this awesome opportunity to lead, and the classic place where we need leadership in our partnerships, in particular in our families, is when things get hard and stressful. And that's in the domain of conflict. When we're disagreeing, when we're not getting along, when we're triggered by each other, when someone's silent and someone's trying to get connection, and there's this rift between us. It feels terrible, man. And the leader just says, this feels terrible. I want this to be different. Can we reconnect? And how can we do that in a good way so we both feel safe again and reconnected?
Yeah, nice. I love that. And the differentiation there, which is it's not a blanket thing. I am the leader, I take that role, but it's in the moment, right? Who has the resources in that specific moment? You know what? Oh, maybe I do. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, so then let's talk conflict, because this is, I know, a big theme of your book and the work that you do. You know, the book is called, well, actually, can you talk us through the book, Getting to Zero, How to Work Through Conflict in Your High Stakes Relationships, which of course I'm assuming, you know, we often go to relationships are romantic, but they're everywhere as well, right? And conflict comes up in everything. So what is, you know, you said like a trigger. So can you talk us through kind of conflict, what's happening, what's going on for us? And then I'd love to explore like this concept of getting to zero.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I define conflict, I think that might be useful for the listener, as a rupture, a disconnection, or an unresolved issue between two people. An unresolved issue could be something from years ago, or it could be just silence between two people, or one person's silent and the other one's trying to get the connection back. All of that feels conflictual, and it can lead both parties or one person to feel disconnected from the other person. And if you've ever been in a long-term relationship and felt really good, you know how bad it feels to feel disconnected from someone that you care about. It just feels bad. So I'm trying to teach people how to get back to a good place, and that good place is zero.
Yeah.
And when conflict's very normal. I always remind people, there's nothing wrong with you if you have a lot of conflict or even a little conflict. We're all a little different. I talk about it as we have these scared animals living inside of us. I have a scared animal in me because we're social mammals. And what's very threatening to social mammals is when you're too close to them, or you too far away from them, or you kick them out of the herd. We do not like that. That's extremely threatening to us. So most conflicts are about moving too close or too far away from each other. And then our work is, how do we attune to each other and find that place where this is just right? And then when we fight, which will be too close or too distant, how do we get back to that good place again?
Right. Okay. Yeah, I love that. Well, I was going to say analogy, but it's not, right? Because as you said, that's us. We are animals. We are social animals, social mammals, and that is the nature of something that's still quite instinctual.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So then what I'd love to explore is, you know, because you said in there, right, like conflict is normal. And that's something that I've, in my own past, grappled with a little bit, this idea, you know, you kind of said it before, right? Like purchased the idea of this fairy tale relationship and it doesn't have conflict. And I hear that kind of stuff. I see two things, I suppose. One, that idea, a relationship needs to not have conflict. We never argue. It's almost like a badge of honor, you know, and a little part of me kind of goes, oh man, okay. But then there's I know conflict is kind of normal. I'd like it not to be all the time, but I'm fucking terrified of it.
Yep.
I don't know. So I I do work with a lot of, you know, quote unquote nice guys who like, I'm just going to do anything I can to avoid that.
Yeah.
I'm going to appease, please, ignore, avoid. So how do we start to even, you know, address this?
Well, you got to, again, change your mind about conflict. You got to open your mind to the possibility, and then you can test it against your own experience, of course, that conflict is a doorway. It's not a door. That you can walk through, and you can become stronger and more resilient on the other side. And you can also feel more connected to people, have deeper relationships, have better relationships, have more satisfying relationships because they're real, they're authentic. The messiness is coming out, and the two of you are dealing with it. That's fucking life, man. That's living to me. That's, I want to live. I want to feel alive in life. I don't want to feel dead. And I think those relationships that avoid conflict are there's a deadening quality to it, a numbing, you know, because they're not really, it's not like they don't have conflict. It's that we don't go there. We don't do the things that would bring up conflict, like talk about real shit. So therefore you have a shallow relationship. So, you know, I just think you're going to get more bang for your buck in a relationship if you're willing to get messy. But I'm not talking about being rude and blaming and shit. I'm talking about, you got to have some capacity to deal with messiness So you're increasing what I call your discomfort threshold conflict, and things like meditation can help with that, breathing, partner exercises. But you're increasing your discomfort so that you can learn how to be more effective, be a better communicator. Which, dude, the translation in life, like as a leader in business or in your family or sports or something else, is like amazing in terms of how this can translate.
Yeah, because the other thing that's popping up for me here is, we have perhaps some of our more common other relationships besides our romantic ones, family, maybe work and business, and friendships. And, it's one of the things that I see in so many guys in relationships, and, obviously in my own experience, is it's very easy to stick to surface level relationships with our mates.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we've never been modeled or, given permission or felt safe to explore like a real conversation, when your mate says, how you doing? And you just, yeah, good. But there's some real shit you've got to explore. And so that isn't necessarily conflict, but there's an invitation perhaps to a depth where it doesn't feel nice. And as you said, like expanding that kind of discomfort threshold of actually talking about some real shit.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you talk about this as just being vulnerable, taking risks, and being real, right? And like saying what's actually occurring inside, which is I feel depressed, I feel anxious, I feel insecure today. Like whatever it is, like has so been conditioned for men to like not do that still, even with all the permission we have today to not be that, most men are still subordinating to that construct. And then they're in a gender straitjacket about how they should be, Yeah.
And it kind of, it's almost like just so connected to our identity, right? Like if I say those things, I'm depressed, I'm feeling shitty. And then it's really saying something about me and who I am.
Right.
Yeah.
And therefore you're going to be judged and rejected, and you're not going to be picked on the team, or you're not going to get a raise, or, it goes against all of our like, wait a minute, if I reveal myself here, I'm going to get excluded. I'm going to not get chosen, and on and on.
Yeah, and back to that point you said before, right? Like too close, too far away, or essentially ostracized from the tribe, from where I feel or seek or hope for belonging.
Yeah,
that's pretty terrifying. So can you touch on that for a little bit? Because I know you've done some work with men and obviously young men in the past. How do we explore this? Like as you said, there's so much permission that we have, right? But we also butt up against, like men don't need spaces and all these kind of things. So how do you think we actually start to really invite men to, let's just go really simple, though it might not be simple, to start looking inward and doing some work and maybe leaning into more uncomfortable situations with themselves and their relationships?
Well, I think a good starting question for a guy listening is to answer this question: is your relationship life working? If your answer is yes, then you can stop listening now. Great, good for you. If there's something about your relationship life, particularly your high-stake relationship life, like a business partnership, an intimate partner, like a marriage, your relationship with your parents, or your relationship with your kids if you're a father, if there's something that's not working, that's where you got to put your attention. And the attention isn't to change the other person or to change that relationship. It's for you to change. It's for you to start becoming more of a relational leader and more competent communicator under stress, and to know yourself, know all of your buttons so that you can educate the people in your life about those. But I think that probably the very first step is to just ask yourself a very simple question. Because I don't like to try to convince guys that they need to change, because look, if you want to be a stubborn ass for the next 10 years and pretend like your life's great and working, go for it. But if you're humble enough to say, fuck, I have a little bit of pain here, or a lot of pain here, and you've noticed, if you look back, that you repeat, your relationship patterns repeat, and you have a part in that. And you actually say, I think I want to do something about that, because it would help me be a better fill in the blank, boss, husband, father, whatever. Great. Then you got people like Mike here and me who can help if you want. But I think it comes first. The very first step is you got to be willing to take the next step.
Yeah. I love that. And a simple question. So what I would love to explore very briefly in that is, you said, is your relationship working? What could you say would be indicators, let's say, of working or not working?
Yeah. Your own level of satisfaction. Am I satisfied here? Do I have a deeper yearning to feel more connected to this person? Do I want more depth and meaning? Do I feel seen and known by this person? Do I feel emotionally safe to really reveal every single corner of me, even parts of myself that I don't know? Do I feel like this person completely has my back? Do I completely have their back? And again, if you start stumbling here with any of these questions, it's probably a sign that you have some work to do.
Yeah, right. And therefore we can, be that relational leader in the relationship with ourselves almost.
Yeah. I mean, the very, least we can look in the mirror in the morning and kind of when no one's looking and be like, do I really like the person staring back at my face here?
Mm.
How is this relationship, this primary relationship between me, myself, and I, could it be better? Am I using all substances or my phone or work to distract myself from actually just sitting quietly with myself? And can I actually just sit with myself? Could I set a timer for 2 hours and just sit quietly in nature and not freak out? Could I do that exercise?
Yeah, and I can tell from experience that that's a challenge. It's something that I set all the
big
guys that come into my coaching program. I invite them to spend 15 minutes a day sitting with themselves, and very much make that distinction of by yourself versus with yourself, because a lot of us spend time by ourselves, but that's often filled, as you said, the phone, the something.
Yeah, right.
But with ourselves is getting to know, and fundamentally a lot of this stuff, growth and awareness, is about knowing ourselves, right? So spend some time there for sure. And I think what this is also on some level speaking to, and you said it before, and I think it's really pivotal, is can you be humble enough to admit essentially the truth of what the situation is without having to fit it into a box or put labels or judgments around it? Simply be humble enough to speak the truth to yourself.
That's right. Yeah, I love that. And I think shame is, one of the big things that gets in our way as men is pride. In my experience, pride postures over shame. Shame is a collapse, and pride is like a posture, and they're opposites, complementary opposites. So if I'm feeling shame, the last thing I want you to do, Mike, is see me in my shame. So I'm going to posture over it, and I'm going to tell you I'm fine. Right. But deep down inside, I feel shame. Shame about what? I don't know. Could be money. Could be I'm comparing myself to you. It could be my sex life. It could be anything. There's a lot to be ashamed about as a man, especially when we're comparing ourselves to other men out there in the world. So it's just another invitation for guys to get curious, because shame is also elusive. It usually, most guys, if you ask them if they feel shame, they're going to say no, in my experience. And but if we ask their partner, is he defensive? Is he irritable? Right? Does he get angry sometimes? Then the partner says yes to all of those. The guy's got shame, guaranteed.
And those behaviors, therefore, are a bit of an indicator of what we're hiding.
That's right.
Yeah.
We're defending against the more vulnerable, tender, very hard to feel experience called shame.
Yeah, and I like that, that I almost got a vision, right, of like this shadow, right? And this is probably very apt in terms of looking at our shadow, but as you said, like pride postures over shame, the shadow growing to posture over the shame there, and almost preventing connection with the other, like a wall, but connection with self, right? And almost, starting to create a dishonest pattern of with self as well. And then there was something else you said in there, and I love that it was, essentially, hey, how about learning to increase your capability to communicate under stress?
Yeah.
And, I know... Okay.
You're back.
Yeah.
I think that was your side, but I don't know for sure.
Maybe. Okay. Well, anyway,
Either way, you're back. And the last thing I heard you say was the discomfort conversation under stress or something like that.
Yeah. So in a simple sense, right, as you said, like learning to communicate more effectively under stress, that's a pretty simple task when you lay it out like that, right? But we have so much emotion and emotionality around it. As you said, like I've inherited all the stuff about I shouldn't, as you said, I was a sensitive, emotional, empathetic boy, but I learned to switch that off, right? And anything we switch off, it atrophies if we hide it in a corner, right? And then often what I see in men is then there's an expectation either externally or internally to be very good at that thing. Open up. Okay, I need to be really skillful at this. But it's a weak, atrophied arm, like a broken limb that wears a cast for weeks and weeks. You take it out, it's white and thin, and it's not very strong. Exactly. So let's build that ability to communicate under stress. So this, I think, takes us back into conflict. So can you talk us through then, I know you talk about this, kind of the stages of conflict. I want to explore that. And then, I'll leave my next question until after that.
Yeah, for sure. So there's, I call them 5 types of conflicts. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, or.
Yeah, and also kind of before, during, and after. Because what I'm hearing is at some point in there is this under stress moment where we might, fight, flee, or potentially lead.
Cool. So I have a very simple diagram. You just draw a circle on a napkin, and it's got arrows going one way, clockwise or counterclockwise, doesn't matter. And if you draw just 3 little dots on it in 3 different spots, the one dot is like where we disconnect. We have a fight, an argument, we disconnect. And then the next dot over, going in the direction that your arrow is going, is you got to make an effort to reconnect. And then the final dot is you're connected again. But invariably, within a day or a month or a week, you're going to get disconnected again. You're going to have another conflict. And this cycle, I call it the conflict repair cycle. It's going to come for the rest of your life. And a lot of men, I think, are in fantasies here that if I get good at conflict even, it goes away. It starts to kind of just dissipate and disappear off in the shadows or something. It's like, no, dude. Again, that's another fucking fantasy. It's going to go on forever. And your job is to become more and more skillful in conflict. And that just means you learn some basic tools on how to listen better, how to communicate better, so that not only during the conflict, you're a little better off, because most of us just our scared animal grabs the steering wheel and takes over.
Right.
And we raise our voice, we say the stupid thing, we withdraw and retreat into our shell. We do a lot of things that upset the other person. That's our scared animal in the steering wheel. And that's when we're in the back part of our brain. And as quickly as possible, an hour, a day, as soon as you can, you got to muster up the strength and courage to go back into the front seat, grab the steering wheel from that scared animal, and take over, essentially. And that looks like taking responsibility for your part. It looks like empathizing with your partner. And now we start to repair and reconnect, because the scared animal kind of fucked things up and it's over. And now we both feel bad. And it's after the fact. Well, as soon as you can, after the fact, you want to come back to what I call repair and reconnect. And for a lot of guys, they want to fix it and just problem solve, and especially externally. Well, you need to, if you would only, well, here's what we should tactically do next time. And most partners, whether they're male or female, or wherever they are on the gender binary or non-binary, most of us want to feel understood in our experience, right? And that's the first step, is can I try to understand their experience? And I teach a tool called LUFU, L-U-F-U. It stands for listen until they feel understood. And using LUFU, that's the commitment. I'm going to listen to you until I feel understood, until you feel understood. That's pretty cool, because it could take days sometimes, or 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. But just that commitment alone is huge. And it says to the other person, I care about your experience, I care about your feelings, and I want to understand.
Yeah, I love that. And what I'm getting in there as well is like the intention is one, to understand, but perhaps before that is to repair and reconnect. And what I hear in my own experience as well, as what I've seen a lot of the time, is often the intention coming is to be right.
Yeah.
And that's going to get in the way often of that repair, reconnect, and then obviously sitting down to listen until they feel understood. So can you talk us through, because I love that simple tool, right? And this is something that I talk about myself as a lesson that I needed to learn, unfortunately, many times. And we talk about in the work that I do as well, is like, as you said, we want to fix it. And we want to go into that masculine mode of solving. And well, perhaps we can satiate that a little bit when we connect to, I love this idea of LUFU. The solution right now is to listen until they feel understood. Yeah. And then all of a sudden we can bring our intention and our energy to that space. So can you talk us through then? It might be hard to condense, but okay. So I'm sitting here and I go, you know what? Fuck. My little animal has been behind the wheel right now and I feel hurt. And I mean, like, really what I want is I want them to come and apologize and make me right and them being wrong. That would feel nice, right? But fuck, I know I need to not do that. Even if I can't understand all the stuff behind it, I know that just doesn't lead to repair and reconnect. So then I choose to do that, but my partner doesn't want it. They are leaning away. They want the apology. They want so how do we kind of go towards that when we're choosing to lead it and our partner doesn't want to come towards it?
If they're not coming around consistently over time, you might think about leaving that relationship. So I got to say that first, because conflict can't be repaired with one person in a partnership. Now, if they're gone, you can do some things on your own. If they cut you out of your life to like heal, that's a different conversation. But I think you're talking about in an actual partnership, right? So in a partnership, you've got to have a commitment ahead of time, an agreement, basically, simple way of thinking it, that when we have conflict, we both come back around within 24 hours and we own our part. And we do our best to understand the other person or listen to them until they feel understood, empathize, validate. We try to get us both back to a good place, back to zero. So there's a commitment ahead of time. And then when you get scared and the animals are in the driver's seat, you both remember, or one of you remembers, wait, we had an agreement. Let's fall back on our agreement. Because we forget, right, when we're really triggered. But as soon as possible, we got to come back to that agreement. And then if your partner's pulling away, you can remind them of the agreement. Hey, in a non-jerky way, like, hey, remember we had an agreement. Like, this matters to me. This matters to you because we agreed upon it. If you need space, that's totally cool. As long as you come back around. And how much time do you need? 5 minutes? Do you need the rest of the evening to yourself? What do you need? Do whatever you need, but you got to come back and we've got to repair and reconnect and make this good for both of us. And with that kind of agreement in place, it should be pretty solid. But if you have a resistant partner, that's kind of a different conversation.
Yeah. And I think, thank you for sharing that, right? Like, sometimes a relationship, has reached its point for each individual or for both people, right? But the invitation there, and I love the idea there that, you're talking about like creating agreements, right? When we get into conflict, the animal takes over. We can't think that clearly. Is a really simple way I like to look at it, right?
We're really bad. We're very
unreliable. We lose access, to resources and thinking straight. And so if I've got some things that I can lean on and pull in, that were there ahead of time, there's that thing, right? And that I'm taking it speaks to that point earlier of being the relational leader in that moment.
That's right. Yeah. And I liked what you just did there with your arm. It's like when I always often talk about when you partner with someone, you're tying your boats together. It's like tying boats together in the middle of the ocean. My own independence is my boat. Your independence is your boat. But now we tie them together. We're kind of interdependent, which makes us very vulnerable in some ways, but also strong, very strong in other ways, if we can learn to work together as a team. So if I'm over here in my boat upset, it's actually part of your responsibility to help me get back to a good place, because we got places to go. We got storms to fight and we got battles to fight out there in the ocean. There's sharks here and, maybe something broke and we've got to fix it together. So we really need each other to be in as good of a place as we can, because we're going to do better in life, in this ocean of life, right? So if we think about partnership that way, I think our attitude starts to shift to, right, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing to be with this person, partner up with them. So it's my responsibility to learn how to work with their scared animal and learn how to work with this whole thing and learn how to communicate under stress. And God damn, I got a lot I got to learn here. And, so what? It's like, you're going to be so much fucking stronger and more powerful if you learn together. Yeah.
And ignorant to close your eyes to it, right? And hope that you can tie your boats together and loosely, and then they'll get to, where they need to go. And by the way, in the ocean, the big wide ocean, there's storms. I love that, because obviously you see there's some responsibility there, right? Because if I say, hey, well, this is your shit and you just got to go heal that, what I'm essentially saying is I'm going to untie my rope from your boat for a while and keep going on the trajectory. And you can find me when you're sorted. Yeah. Which of course can't work anyway, because you are going on a shared direction. So as soon as the waiting, right, to continue the analogy, is all off if I try and go by myself. So what I'd love to explore, I've heard you use this term codependent-ish. And so what I want to explore here, because what I'm hearing in what you just described is, you said interdependence, right? But it's speaking to when we're in and let's just go to a romantic relationship. When we're in a relationship with another, it's very popular now to look at codependency and don't be codependent, but we are talking about a dependence here.
Yeah.
So can you kind of separate those two things for us a little bit?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the big difference here, the big distinction is in an interdependent relationship, in our boat metaphor, we're both doing the work. We're both looking at our part. We're both participating. You cook meals one night, I cook the next night. I'm paddling one day, you paddle the next. The next day we're paddling together. So it feels fair and it feels mutual. In a codependent-ish relationship, and we're both tied together, I'm helping you out, but you're not helping me out. You're the one with the kind of problems. You're the one that needs to be changed and fixed and rescued or whatever. And I'm kind of invested in that. And that's kind of how our boat operation runs, is we only operate and run effectively if I'm helping you, but you're not helping me. That's very different than like a mutual dynamic.
And thank you for that. And can you kind of give us some examples of what that might look like? That codependent-ish, those behaviors, because there's one, like, I'm in charge of rescuing you or you're in charge of rescuing me. But because one of the things that pops up in my head is, like this kind of idea of like emotional labor, to speaking to men who might, not everyone, of course, but have, switched that part off and not really learned it, right? And being a bit emotionally constipated. That kind of pops up as one idea for me, right? Like the other partner is leading that emotional side. What else would you say comes under that umbrella of codependent-ish? Yeah,
well, in that example, it's a tricky one with emotional labor, because generally, if we're going to stereotype men and women are a little more emotionally intelligent, so they might feel like they're doing more of the emotional labor in the relationship, and that might be true. And some relationships can work and be effective in a dynamic. So I just want to put that out there, that just because a guy has a very hard time feeling doesn't mean he can't have a successful relationship if his wife is doing most of the feeling. That can work. Now, I don't think that would work in my marriage, and I don't want that relationship personally, but I don't want to necessarily make someone wrong. If it's working in some capacity for them, cool, be my guest. But I would challenge the man and the woman, they both have a part here. The man, it's like, dude, you can feel. You're actually a nurturing, beautiful, heart-centered being somewhere in there, and you can do some things to try to get access to that would actually have you be able to empathize with her feelings more. And then she could actually put the brakes on doing so much of the emotional labor and allowing him the space to learn and figure it out, because she's kind of enabling him if she keeps feeling all the time, right? Yeah, so I think it's I think in a modern relationship, us men are tasked and charged with learning how to feel, because I think it is better for long-term partnership if you know how to feel and actually articulate your feelings.
Yeah, and it creates a let's call it, back to the boat, perhaps a more even-keeled relationship dynamic, right? Where, as you said, it might work for some people, but maybe that also invites the question that you asked earlier: is that working in truth?
Exactly.
And humble,
really honest
honesty. Yeah.
And another example of codependency, I think in the classic definition is you've got a depressed partner or an alcoholic partner or a drug addicted partner, and the codependent person is usually the one trying to help them get sober or trying to relieve them from pain or whatever. They kind of become like a bedside nurse, if you will, in a weird, fucked up kind of way. And often they're just repeating their childhood sort of pattern with mom and dad. That's kind of in the classic sort of textbook example. But, if you're in that dynamic, again, it's kind of one way. I'll help you, but you don't help me.
Yeah. So again, an invitation to explore it. But one of the things I think that I personally like, in this term codependent-ish, is that it automatically, to me, invites that there's a bit of a nuance here and a spectrum. Things aren't necessarily black or white, right? And there might be certain things, right? Emotionality, maybe there is the codependent-ish, but not elsewhere, right? So things aren't necessarily black or white, and it invites exploration at the very least.
That's right. And curiosity, right? Like, can I just be curious? Because I'm totally codependent-ish, because I said this a couple times recently, like, not in my marriage, but in my work in the world. I'll fucking give till I bleed sometimes. You know, I'll forget to take care of myself, right? And those of us who are in the service-based industry in the world, coaches, healers, practitioners, therapists, doctors, nurses, you know, it's hard for us to take care of ourselves. It's hard for us to actually prioritize our own fucking needs sometimes.
Yeah, I feel that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last thing I want to explore is back to what we were talking about in terms of conflict, you know, leading the relationship. The scared little animal is driving the car, or maybe the boat, if we go back to that analogy. And where I want to place this is with our children. Now, obviously, children vary in age, right? You've got 10 and 12, I think you said they are. So my assumption is going to be that, you know, the adult, the parent in this situation is by and large relationally leading that. But, you know,
You got it.
How do you explore that when it comes to a kid who is essentially running their scared animal, and you know they won't come back and they won't listen and they're closed off? Like, obviously, there's countless examples, but can you give us a little bit on, as a parent who struggles to bring their child to the table, even if you know we still might be doing it for ourselves? How do we explore that?
Yeah, it's an important question. I think. My wife and I recorded a podcast on something along this line, which was, we see a lot of parents let their kids' emotions run the household. And they kind of call the shots. So upset 2-year-old or 6-year-old or whatever gets very demanding. And if the parents, the risk the parent runs here is that if they let that go on, that's what the family system revolves around. And eventually the little child has all the power in the family system, which kids actually don't want power. They don't like power, even though parents like to blame kids for that. It's actually the parent's responsibility to not give the kids so damn much power. So a couple tips are, parents need to learn how to be with their discomfort when their kid's tantruming. And I can tell you a quick story. I was at an REI. That's a outdoor store, if anyone isn't sure what an REI is in the States here. And there's a line, right? And to the cashier, and there's this woman with a 2-year-old, I think he was 3. And he says, "Mom, I want the candy," or whatever, like in the aisles, you know how they put the candy. And she's like, "No, you know, you don't get that." And he just fucking lost it. And this kid was rolling around on the floor, tantruming. And what was so amazing about this woman, and this is in a public store, people around, and the kid is screaming at the top of his lungs, right? Everybody's like looking, like, what in the hell is this? And the kid, she's just holding space for the kid. And she's like, "I know, I hear you. You're upset. It makes total sense. I got you. Yep. It's going to be okay. And I'm right here when you're done." And eventually his tantrum petered out after about a minute, but it felt, you know, if you're in the store, it felt like an hour. Yeah. It's like being on an airplane, right? With a crying baby.
Yeah.
It felt like a really long time. And she was so amazing. And then he was done. And he went up to her. She held firm on the boundary. He didn't get the candy, and they moved on and they paid for their other thing, and it was done. Parents need to be willing to do that kind of thing where they allow their kids to have their feelings and they set limits, you know? No, you don't get to have the cookie. No, you don't get to run outside with that. No, if you're choosing, here's another technique one of my parent teachers taught me, is if you're choosing to run outside and not listen to mommy and daddy, you're choosing to not play the game later with me. So it's a consequence thing, but the language is choose. You know? So that they keep seeing in their awareness that they're choosing it. Yeah. So there's a lot more I could say here. I love this conversation because boundaries in parenting is essential, because boundaries help kids feel safe, but parents have to like mean it all the way down in their body, or the boundary's not going to be effective and the kid's going to keep poking.
Yeah, there's got to be some dependability to it. It can't be a boundary for a moment and then you cave, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steady as a rock. And united front, if you're a 2-parent family, united front is always key.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. Thank you. And I'll make sure that we get the link to that podcast as well, so the listeners can tune into that with your wife.
Oh, cool.
And you.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm loving all of this. Jayson, I know we're going to cut shortly. So please, can you tell us about your book? Obviously, we'll have all the information where people can find it and all that kind of stuff, but let us know a little bit more about the book.
Yeah, for sure. So it's called Getting to Zero, as Mike said, how to work through conflict in your high stakes relationships. I think it's a really great user-friendly manual, if you will, or handbook on how to work through conflict. I mean, you can literally turn to a page and do an exercise. If you read it together, I think that would be really powerful. It's full of stories. I talk about my own shit and my own mistakes, and hopefully you can learn from those.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and it's available in all the places October 5th. Relationshipschool.com is our website and our podcast, and you can find the book there, or gettingtozerobook.com.
Beautiful. And yeah, as I said, everyone will make sure that we have all the links for that. So wherever you find this, be sure to check out all the information on Jayson, on the book, on the Relationship School as well, of course. Jayson, thank you so much for your time to talk with us today. I've enjoyed it so much, learning, scribbling away, and I'll go back over this myself just with my own learning. I appreciate you and the work that you're doing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this book out there as well. I think it can really help some people, help some families, and you know, as you said, do some really pragmatic and practical good as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. I feel like we could keep going for a long time. So thanks for all the great questions and for doing what you're doing.
A pleasure. Thank you very much, you legend. You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show dedicated to helping everyday men build legendary relationships with yourself, with your partners, and in your world. If you have got something from this podcast, please share it with someone that you think could benefit from it. And please visit your home for podcasts. Like us, subscribe to us, leave us a review. Your feedback is phenomenal in getting this in front of more eyes and ears. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell, and remember to build that legendary integrity.